1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. Verse 2. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, "You must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods." Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. Verse 3. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. Verse 4. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Verse 5. Solomon worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Verse 6. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. Verse 7. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built pagan shrines of Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Verse 8. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. Verse 9. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Verse 11. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshipping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. Verse 11. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants." Verse 12. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do this while you are still alive. I will take the kingdom away from your son. Verse 13. And even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city. Verse 14. Then the Lord raised up Hadad the Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to be Solomon's adversary. Verse 15. Years before, David had defeated Edom. Joab, his army commander, had stayed to bury some of the Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. While there, they killed every male in Edom. Verse 16. Joab and the army of Israel had stayed there for 6 months, killing them. Verse 17. But Hadad and a few of his father's royal officials escaped and headed for Egypt. Hadad was just a boy at that time. Verse 18. They set out from Midian and went to Paran, where others joined them. Then they traveled to Egypt and went to Pharaoh, who gave them home, food, and some land. Verse 19. Pharaoh grew very fond of Hadad, and he gave him his wife's sister in marriage, the sister of Queen Tahpenes. Verse 20. She bore him a son and named him Genubath. Tahpenes raised him in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's own sons. Verse 21. When the news reached Hadad in Egypt that David and his commander Joab were both dead, he said to Pharaoh, "Let me return to my own country." Verse 22. Why? Pharaoh asked him, "What do you lack here that makes you want to go home?" "Nothing," he replied, "but even so, please let me return home." Verse 23. God also raised up Rezon, son of Eliada, as Solomon's adversary. Rezon had fled from his master, King Hadadezer of Zobah. Verse 24. And had become the leader of a gang of rebels. After David conquered Hadadezer, Rezon and his men fled to Damascus, where he became king. Verse 25. Rezon was Israel's bitter adversary for the rest of Solomon's reign. and he made trouble just as Hadad did. Rezon hated Israel intensely and continued to reign in Aram. Verse 20 says, another rebel leader was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, one of Solomon's own officials. He came from the town of Zereda in Ephraim, and his mother was Zeruiah, a widow. Verse 27, this is the story behind his rebellion. Solomon was rebuilding the supporting terraces and repairing the walls of the city of his father David. Verse 28, Jeroboam was a very capable young man, and when Solomon saw how industrious he was, he put him in charge of the labor force from the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, the descendants of Joseph. Verse 29, one day as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh met him along the way. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone in a field. Verse 30, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Verse 31, then he said to Jeroboam, take 10 of these pieces, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 of the tribes to you. Verse 32, but I will leave him one tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. Verse 33, for Solomon had abandoned me and worshipped Ashereth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites. He has not followed my ways and done what is pleasing in my sight. He has not obeyed my decrees and regulations as David his father did. Verse 34, but I will not take the entire kingdom from Solomon at this time, for the sake of my servant David, the one whom I chose and who obeyed my commands and decrees. I will keep Solomon as leader for the rest of his life. Verse 35, but I will take the kingdom away from his son and give 10 of the tribes to you. Verse 36, his son will have one tribe, so that the descendants of David my servant will continue to reign, shining like a lamp in Jerusalem, the city I have chosen to be the place for my name. Verse 37, and I will place you on the throne of Israel, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. Verse 38, if you listen to what I tell you and follow my ways and do whatever I consider to be right, and if you obey my decrees and commands, as my servant David did, then I will always be with you. I will establish an enduring dynasty for you, as I did for David, and I will give Israel to you. Verse 39, because of Solomon's sin, I will punish the descendants of David, though not forever. Verse 40, Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but he fled to King Shishak of Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. Verse 41, the rest of the events in Solomon's reign, including all his deeds and his wisdom, are recorded in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Verse 42, Solomon ruled in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Verse 43, when he died, he was buried in the city of David, named for his father. Then his son Rehoboam became the next king. Amen.